Okay, wonderful. Let's get started. So as I mentioned, this is a Q&A opportunity for you to ask your questions, and we will make our best attempt to answer them. If we don't have the answer, we will put a note and make sure we email you the answer, provided that you give us your email. So who would like to jump in? I think probably if we have anybody who will, well, just go ahead and jump in. I was going to say, raise your hand if that's most comfortable for you. But let us know what questions you have about the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Grant.
All right, well, if nobody's going first, I'll jump in here.
Okay, go for it.
So I probably already know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. So when we attended the first one back in December or whatever it was, my understanding was it would be a 50% match, as in we would have to come up with 50% of what the grant amount was. But when reading in the application, I'm seeing it's more like 50% from us for the overall project, 50% from grant. Is that the correct understanding?
That is correct. So it's 50% of the total project cost, which translates to 100% of the match unless you qualify in any of the categories where you would get a 25% match.
So on that, so if we don't already have a small business established that's women-owned, do we have time between now and the actual granting to assume that it's going to be women-owned? So, does that business already have to be established to kind of qualify for that?
You will not.
That was 25%.
Yeah, not for the phase 1 application, but you will need to have that established by the time you submit the phase 2 application, the full application. And a part of that is because you need to obtain a unique entity identifier number from sam.gov. sam.gov is the federal system that manages grantees, and it's required that you have your UEI on the federal application.
Okay.
So you want to have your business information together, but it really won't take long for you to file to create an entity.
Okay. So I let somebody else go, or should I throw in one more?
Go ahead while you're on a roll.
Yeah, well, I'm on a roll here. But now I interrupted myself. So just as far as the numbers, because I'm still pretty vague, I haven't unfortunately had the time to dive in as deeply as I would have liked to. And so how specific at this phase do I need to be on what the equipment cost would be? Because if I'm looking at, and I guess I'm forgetting her name now. Was it Amanda that was on the last meeting?
Yes.
And so I had a Zoom call with her after that last meeting to kind of follow up with some other questions. And she had said, you might be able to answer better just on the project we're looking at is a mobile juicing unit. Mm-hmm. And so she was wondering about, that you might be able to give more confidence on whether that would or would not apply since it's mobile. Like, would the mobile aspect be a deterrent to qualifying, since they're looking more for, something that's, stable, structure that is going to benefit a lot of people? In my mind, the mobile, you can benefit more people by being able to take it to different farms. But anyhow, I don't know if you can speak to that at all, or.
I'm unaware of a requirement that it's fixed infrastructure. I'm certain mobile does qualify. And the primary thing that the USDA and CDA will be interested in is that the unit is servicing a broad range of growers. That we really want to impact as many growers as possible with these projects. So that certainly would qualify. And to your budget question, On the phase one application, there's a series of radio buttons that you can choose depending on your budget range. We're not asking
Oh,
for a precise budget, just an
that's right.
indication of how much money you expect to request.
And so does it I'm trying to remember, was it specific about what the overall project cost would be for the question, or what the grant amount? So we're putting in
Grant amount.
50%. The grant amount is what we're plugging into the application.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm sure I can come up with some more, but I'm going to give somebody else a chance.
Okay, thanks.
And it's a minimum of $100,000, correct, for the grant
Correct.
amount?
Yep, that's correct. Greg, I see you did the thing that I always do and you raised your hand. So go for it.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning.
If awarded the grant, it's a reimbursement on expense grant, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and I'm wanting to apply for the grant to expand our food hub. And I know the minimum is $1,000, and I don't know what some of the equipment might cost, and I also don't know how big I should go as far as how big I might want to expand our food hub as far as the warehouse and the cold storage unit and a bigger freezer. So I guess I'm wondering when I apply if I should go big, and then you see all the whoever's determining the need. You don't have a lot of money, so I'm just I guess my question is, in my own mind, is do I have a better chance of getting some of the grant money if I kind of tame it down instead of going big?
I think because we do have such limited funds, in reality, what we will do is once we understand how many projects we're going to have requests for, what the budget range looks like, we'll probably try to come back and talk about what's needed, what's wanted, and if there's any room in between.
Okay.
So I would suggest ask for what you want, and then we can have a discussion of whether it looks like that'll be feasible or not.
Okay. And then as far as if I was awarded any grant money and I'm using it to pay for increased warehouse space, that's a monthly thing. I'm paying rent to the landlord every month. So how long does the grant expend for?
The grant is 3 years, but
Okay.
it won't pay operating expenses. So
Okay.
it's really for construction, equipment, project costs to get those things into place, but it's not for personnel. I don't think it'll allow for leasing during that period. And the reason that is, if you think about what the USDA is trying to accomplish, they would like to see new infrastructure in place to strengthen the food system. And so buying an existing business, leasing from somebody else, that's exchanging ownership, but it's not creating additional and new infrastructure.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. When I talk to a warehouse owner, he can put the cost of the infrastructure, like pay for the freezer, pay for the cooler, and then build that into my lease payment over the 5-year lease. But I won't calculate that way. I'll just calculate the cost of the equipment as if I'm buying it outright. Okay, got it.
Yeah. And I believe your lease can serve as match for your project, given that you are putting the equipment into this structure.
Okay.
And I'll confirm that. Jody, if you wouldn't mind making a note, we'll confirm that.
Okay, and last question, Brian, is if I still need, well, regardless of the grant or not, set that aside, is that opportunity still available with CDA to buy equipment at low interest rates on a loan program?
The loan program is still operating. We've been short of funds because we've loaned out most everything, but we do have funds coming back in, and we will be making new loans soon.
Oh, so there'll be a new loan application portal or something?
Yes, it'll be the same, but we essentially need to look at applications again to figure out what the funding, let's say the queue for people waiting. Have you submitted an application already, Greg? Okay,
No.
same portal, but I can walk you through that as well.
Okay, and when will the grant winners be determined for this grant?
We need to have our recommendations to the USDA by May 24th.
Okay,
They will then review the applications, come back with notes. There will probably be some back and forth with the applicants. And sometime I'm expecting in early July, the actual awards will be made.
okay, and then last question, I know I keep asking. The grant winners, when would be the first soonest they would expect to see a reimbursement on expenses reimbursement?
I expect that a grantee could submit an invoice days after their award has been made.
Okay,
So it'll take us a couple weeks to process that and get things done, 2 or 3 weeks. So I'd say 2 to 3 weeks after an award would be the first time you'd probably see money in the bank.
okay, okay, that's roughly great. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, you bet, Greg.
So can I pick your brain for a little? My understanding is I know they're wanting to do new construction, but do I understand correctly that if it were to be a purchase of an existing structure, if that was as long as it was a cooperative purchase of more than one entity, like multiple growers,
Right.
would that count?
I don't believe purchases are reimbursable by the grant. Improvements are.
Yeah, for some reason I got this hunch that if it was a cooperative purchase.
And Jenny, if you've got a hunch, I'm guessing you're right, but we can put that on the list. And while we're talking, I'll try to find the answer to that.
Okay, that'd be great. And then the other thing I'm considering is I'm just gonna say it, a peach salsa.
Mhm.
I've always wanted that. I don't think if we kept it in-house, it would not be $100,000. We wouldn't meet that threshold. But we've run out of space to do any more processing on our farm. And we also are not eligible to process low acid foods. So we would need to have a co-packer. And I'm wondering if you are aware of any co-packers. I would prefer it be on the Front Range because that's where the product gets sold and distributed.
Right.
But with this project, I think it would qualify because we would need to partner with, say, a Pueblo green chili grower, an onion grower, a garlic grower. So we would be bringing in other growers' products to be in the salsa. And even an Olathe sweet corn, because all of these tomatoes, peaches, sweet corn, chilies, they all come on at the same time. So there's oftentimes some glut of especially imperfect products. So giving an outlet for that glut time for those particular products would involve multiple growers.
Jenny, what would the investment be? What would you use grant funds for?
Well, we would need to find a co-packer and possibly need to purchase equipment for that product, for that process. And we would also need monies for aggregating the product into one central location.
Mhm.
And I would prefer to find, an underserved, is there a qualifying co-packer that you're aware of anywhere in the state?
Mhm.
That would help us get that 25% threshold instead of 50%. And then the labeling and, the product development. I'd like to use the Spur Center for those, the product development. And I don't know if that Spur Center, do they charge for those services?
I don't know. I would expect it depends on the degree of services, but I'm not certain about that. The items you discussed are certainly allowable expenses under the grant, so purchasing equipment, storage, distribution, formulations, that kind of thing are allowable.
Too, right?
Yeah, I think the question I would have with the co-packer is who owns the equipment
Mm-hmm.
and what is your, I guess the question I have is whether you would be applying or should the co-packer be applying?
Right.
And part of the answer to that, when we talk about long-term feasibility, if you're applying and then the co-packer says, okay, well, I'm not going to do this anymore, what value does the equipment have by itself?
Right.
Is that still viable? If the co-packer applies, they don't really have the option to say, I'm not going to do this anymore. They took federal money in order to do this, and they have an obligation to fulfill that.
That makes
So
sense.
just something to think about as you kind of noodle through it. But those expenses are certainly allowable.
Okay. Yeah, I'm picturing like a food hub like Greg, maybe even building new processing infrastructure into their food hub, would also be a good match. Greg, wink, wink.
Yes, yes, we should talk. And I might know another one or two co-packers that could do your project. So offline, we can talk about that.
That's great. Thank you.
Mhm.
And one of the things we are hoping from these phase one applications is where we can identify where there's overlap in intention to do something. So if we have 5 mobile juice processing units, we'll think about, is there a way to create a collaboration that makes efficient use of the money so people aren't competing with each other. And I'm just using that as an example. I'm not suggesting that that's going to happen with mobile juice processing. It was just on my mind.
I've got a couple of questions if
Absolutely.
ready. The first question I had was just on how detailed to get in this phase one application. It says it's not required to submit a phase two application, but one could be denied as early as submittal of the phase one application, or at least advise that they weren't a good fit. So should I treat this as the main application, or do I really pare it down as much as I can?
The idea was that you don't have to treat it as if it's the main application. It was really to make it easier for you to understand what's involved in the project, what you might be asked in the larger application, and by the nature of the questions, determine whether it feels like a good fit for you. We're really going to be looking at eligibility first and foremost. Are you eligible for the project? And then secondly, the degree of alignment with project outcomes. So we will not tell you, Matt, I'm sorry, you just don't align, don't do a phase two, unless you really don't align. If your application looks something like I hate other producers. I just want to do something for myself because I'm the only person that matters. We might say, you know, probably not a good fit because this project is really looking at impacting a number of producers with a single project. But provided that's not the application that you file, then if there's any questions we have or ways, information that might make the application clearer to reviewers, etc., we'll just talk with you about that. And so you can determine whether you want to invest the time to do a phase 2 application.
Mhm. Okay, thanks. And then the phase 1 application theoretically could lead to a certain amount of assistance from the Northwest and Rocky Mountain Regional Food Business Group there. What does that look like? Do they provide simply, is it additional funding to hire a professional grant writer, or do they actually provide individuals, grant writers themselves to match you with?
They do not provide the grant writers themselves, but they do provide, I believe at this point, the threshold is $2,000 to hire a grant writer to help with the application.
Okay. And then finally, for right now, unless something else comes up, when you were speaking with Greg, I believe you had mentioned that a lease, an active lease, could serve as that match. Are there are there other ways of providing a match, in kind, existing infrastructure, anything other than simply money in the bank?
Yeah, so, and we do have to confirm whether or not a lease expenses do qualify as part of the match. But outside of that, you have a cash match, which is where you're expending funds in order to accomplish the project. So you're purchasing equipment that's directly related to the project, that's a cash match. And then there are in-kind matches where you may have time that's being spent, let's say donated by an engineer to help with your project. The value of that engineer's time is an in-kind match. Or if you have somebody that donates or gives you a piece of equipment that's central to the project, that would be an in-kind match. There's a number, if you think about, okay, I have to get this project done. The project has a specific framework around it. Like I'm going to build a structure and buy grain milling equipment to put in that, and then some storage, etc. When you buy half of the grain milling equipment or some part of it, that's part of your cash match. If somebody says, hey, I've got this silo that's you're going to need and I'll give it to you, the value of that would be in-kind match. If you have lawyers, engineers, professional services of any kind who are contributing directly to the project, that would be in-kind match. So just think about the scope of activities that are involved from start to finish and making that project a reality, and what expenses will be incurred in order to do that. And that may help you think about where you might have some of those in-kind match opportunities. Also, if you have grant funding from a non-federal grant, a state or a local grant for the same project, you can use that as match. If you have a loan, you can use that as match. So there's a few different ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. Those things, though, if it's going to be an in-kind through equipment donation or donation of time and expertise, that all has to be in place, again, with those letters of verification by the time of the submittal of that second phase application. Those aren't things that can, happen after the fact.
Right. They have to be committed.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have to be on the ground or already completed, but you have to have the USDA would like some certainty that if the project is going to cost $200,000 and they're going to award $100,000, that those other resources that are essential to finishing the project are in place, are available and committed, so that there's some certainty the entire project will be finished.
Mhm. I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna ask one more. So this is for these like middle tier systems processing aggregation. It's certainly geared towards affecting the largest amount of producers, or bringing, affecting multiple producers. Are product makers and retailers kind of on the other side of that value chain within the state of Colorado? Are they going to be considered for impacts that accrue on that other side of the chain there?
Well, value added is certainly part of the middle of the supply chain. So impacts on value added manufacturers will be helpful, but the USDA is looking, one of the primary goals is to strengthen the environment for producers to be successful, for growers. So they have more market options. They have more possibilities for what they can do with their produce to get more value, or their grain to get more value out of it. It may afford them the opportunity to grow varieties that aren't popular with the general kind of supply chain, but actually have a lot of value with a specific part of the supply chain. So thinking of heirloom grains and things like that. That's one of the key components, is making sure that those producers benefit from any of this activity. It's great that a co-packer as a value-added processor might also benefit, but that's really not the goal as much as that the farmers benefit from the activity. And the question of, like, for Food Hub, there's been a lot of back and forth with the USDA as people are sorting this out, because storage to distribute, like a grocery store, storage to distribute to the retail customer is not middle of the supply chain. They're thinking of that as the retail end. As soon as it gets delivered to the retail outlet, it is now retail activity. The truck that drives it to the grocery store, that is middle of the supply chain. And the cooler that is at the warehouse where the truck picks up product and drives it to the grocery store, that's middle of the supply chain. There is some gray area in there, but as many people as can benefit, that's great. It'll be a strong application, will definitely demonstrate benefit to the producers.
Thank you.
You bet. Hopefully that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, how about you? Oh, Liz, were you gonna unmute?
Yes, I was thinking about it. Can you define for me again what qualifies as a beginning farmer on here? I guess what would it require to meet that, or
10 years or less of farm experience.
okay.
And it's a little tricky. I mean, if you've been working as a farm worker, it's really more that it doesn't necessarily count. It's really more about your own operation, running your
And
own operation.
does it have to be like right now we have a family farm that we don't try to use for income. So did he go away? Oh, there,
I'm still here. Sorry.
they're back. He disappeared. I panicked. But yeah, so we haven't, stepped it up to being like, okay, we're trying to use our farm to, we don't file taxes as, a farm. It's just personal use. So do you have to be a farm that's trying Does this relate to us beginning farmer? Okay, I'll have to read that.
That is the USDA criteria for a beginning farmer or rancher. So you have not operated a farm or ranch for more than 10 consecutive years.
Yeah.
You are not where they say material and substantially participate in the operation. That means that you're running the farm effectively, or at least have a strong role in that. And then you had a question about, so you have a substantial involvement in the day-to-day labor and management, and where there's a more than one member, like a cooperative, all members must meet these requirements. So hopefully that helps. I don't think they really intend like they're trying to move farm workers into farm owners and these kinds of things. So it's really about that key operating role.
And then I guess if our farm doesn't really have anything to do with the project of the juicing trailer, because I don't currently produce, down the road, I could likely produce, but at this point in time, I'm not producing anything. I would be just servicing other farmers. So is it really even relevant, I guess, that I would be a beginning farmer if it's not my farm that's actually going to be using the equipment?
Well, you would be a beginning operator, effectively. If you have a new business that you're setting up, beginning processor.
Okay, so it's kind of same thing. Okay, well, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chris. Socially disadvantaged.
Hey, good morning. Thank you guys for having this session. I had a couple quick follow-up questions. Greg had asked about reimbursements. Reimbursements will be done through CDA?
Correct.
Okay. Also, just a little follow-up on another one of Greg's questions about or actually I can't remember who, somebody was talking about payroll and other sort of costs. And I do think that within the RFSI scope project scope and requirements document from the USDA, there is a section in there under allowable and unallowable costs, or under cost sharing, that speaks to indirect costs. Says it's known as facilities or administrative costs, costs incurred for a common or joint purpose, that are not readily assignable to the cost objectives. Anyhow, it's a little bit hard to understand the language for me. It does specifically says the salaries of administrative and clerical staff should typically be treated as indirect costs. And there are certain conditions where they could be considered direct costs. If you guys have a good understanding of that, I'd love to get a better grip on it. It says like all entities who elect to charge a de minimis rate of 10% must use the MTDC as a base. And so is this kind of generally saying about 10% of your total project costs could be considered indirect costs if they are applicable, obviously? Is
that's the way I read it, yes.
Okay.
And the way I think about indirect costs is that they are the costs that, like your lighting bill, your office rent, your accountant, all of this like business infrastructure that's necessary so a project can be a reality, but it isn't directly related to putting that piece of equipment on the ground and wiring it.
Right.
And you can have personnel costs that are directly related to that project activities. So for instance, if you hire a project manager specifically to make sure that this project is completed on time and on budget, that is an allowable cost during the project.
Insofar as administrative expenses, are there hours that can be counted as indirect costs for, like in my case, it'd be, we're relatively small organization, owner operators, myself and my partner Dana, from our experience working in the farm to market grant, there's, hundreds and hundreds of hours that we put in. And can any of that time be used as an indirect allowable cost?
It is my understanding that it can.
Okay.
The fact that you are doing it does not mean that your time does not have value or that it doesn't need to be done. So as long as you can assign a fair value to that effort, then that can be included.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that is good clarification. This next question, kind of is related to the farm to market grant that we have received from the Colorado Department of Ag.
Mhm.
We've been in touch with you guys a little bit asking about use of those grant funds as a match for the USDA. I wanted to clarify if the full project cost can be considered a match, or if it's just what the CDA is contributing to the farm to market grant, which for our RFSI application, it's going to be an extension of the same work for, kind of like, I think in the phase one asked, this is like trying to get across the finish line,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So tricky question, and I will try to give an answer that's helpful, which is there are I've just been trying to understand with the USDA how they divide this line, and as you can imagine, the line is wide and a bit blurry.
Sure.
The whole project cost is okay. So we have this project, and there's been expenses incurred and activity that's happened that is potentially eligible as match. However, the caveat is that the USDA really wants that match to be an intentional component of the RFSI project.
Mhm.
So they're asking in good faith, were those costs incurred because of essentially you saw the RFSI grant, you were like, hey, I got a great idea. We finally have an opportunity to do this. So now we're going to do X. So what that means to me is the costs that are incurred, say at the time that you became let's say 90 days before award, those pre-award costs. Those are, I think, pretty clearly eligible as match. But costs that you incurred a year ago or 2 years ago are not, because the RFSI wasn't even out then. So in that case, you're just an applicant would be using RFSI as a convenient way to lower project costs, but they had planned on finishing it without the RFSI grant. Otherwise, they wouldn't have undertaken the project.
Yeah.
So it may be helpful to think about what's happening now that wouldn't have happened without the RFSI grant, or what you're proposing would happen that would not have happened without the RFSI grant. And then I think we can talk about the pre-award expenses that can be included in that, and the dollars after that can be included.
Okay. Would that be best to, I can try to spell a little bit of that out and email you perhaps?
That's great, or we can jump on the phone.
Okay, cool, great.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it may be somewhat project specific.
yeah, understood. Okay, I think those are my primary questions. Thank you.
Okay, you bet. Good to see you.
You too.
Jenny, you look like you're going to ask a question.
Well, I just want to, I have to hop off here in 4 minutes. And I would like, if we could chat about what your interpretation is of that cooperative purchase of an
Yes.
existing warehouse that would help house and aggregate and distribute multiple farmers' products.
Yeah, I
And then
will check into
possibly
that.
even- Okay, and then possibly even doing some processing there.
Yeah, I will definitely check into it. I did kind of take a look while we were talking, but sometimes I can do one thing well. I can almost never do two things well. So
Yeah.
we'll
And I
follow
will
up on
look at
that.
it too and see where I got that crazy idea that it might be.
Well,
included.
and it might very well be true. I mean, we know that cooperatives are being encouraged, cooperative efforts. So we will take a look at the existing language and I'll ask the AMS as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, you bet, Jenny. Good to see you.
I'm gonna hop off. All right, thanks,
Okay.
y'all.
Anybody else, additional questions, things that have come up since your original question was answered or asked? Okay,
I would say, I guess before, while I still got you,
you bet.
what is the single thing I can do to create a 100% certainty of being awarded these funds? I jokes.
I probably give up on the idea that there's ever a 100% certainty.
Yeah.
You could create a project that makes every farmer in Colorado feel like they're dancing on rainbows and that their future is more secure than it's ever been.
Okay, let me write this down here. Okay, all right. Okay, excellent.
And throw in some unicorns, that'd be good too.
Okay. I guess the one thing I seriously would like to, and I know you said this before, but I guess that's like a lot of just knowing like what to ask for, and again the tension between modesty and ambition. But if I were to understand your response to kind of that question before, ask for what you want, and that's not going to weigh against your application if they, if the grantors want to offer you less, there will be a conversation around it rather than just dismissal of project idea because the number is a little higher. Okay.
Yes. The only thing I would say that may be helpful related to that is you want to show high efficiency of use of grant funds.
Yeah.
So you want as much impact as possible for as reasonable an investment as possible. So projects that, like in the farm to market infrastructure grant, occasionally we'd get an application that really asked for a lot of money, but was not demonstrating a commensurate amount of impact. And that can signal to reviewers either a lack of understanding of what it really takes, a lack of understanding of the market, or perhaps that something's been padded and there's a lack of good faith. So just think about the impact you want to create, and realistically, what would it take to do that? And if there are some additional items that would really make the project amazing rather than great, go ahead and include those it would be helpful for the reviewers to know why that is amazing instead of great. And then they can decide, is there room for amazing, or is great just going to have to be good enough?
Okay.
Chris.
I thought of one other question. So under the USDA program, there's the equipment only grant funding possibility. And I know we had emailed you guys about this specifically as well, but I noticed that on the CDA page around RFSI, since it was updated, it's now that it's now mentioned that equipment only grants will be offered. And wanted to know, is that going to be concurrent to the phase 2 projects? Or like when we hear back from phase 1, will there be some clarification on the potential to apply under that, simplified application from the USDA?
Unfortunately, the FAQ on the website was truncated. That answer was truncated, so I need to correct that. The correct answer to the equipment only grant, whether it will be offered, is yes, provided funds are available.
Okay.
Our first target is to have these higher impact projects, because the farm to market infrastructure grant put $3.5 million into these small dollar awards. Our average award was around 75,000. The thinking was, let's try to focus these USDA funds on kind of larger collaborative projects, or collaborative meaning it impacts a variety of producers. If, however, it turns out that there weren't enough high quality projects to award as infrastructure only, and there are funds left over, those will be offered as equipment only, which I would expect we would make that determination probably we'll know by mid-summer whether there are funds left over. So we'll probably be prepared in late summer, early fall to do those equipment only grants.
Okay, so in the case that there are available funds left over after the first round of phase 2 applications, then there would be a secondary opportunity to submit a separate application for equipment only. It wouldn't be considered as a secondary option of the same application.
That's correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You bet. Chris, I'm going to have you write my FAQs. You're good at articulating these things.
I'm curious. I have that.
I appreciate that. Liz, anything more from your camp?
Actually, I was going to see if you could help me on one of the questions here. It says, what stage of development is your project in? Concept, planning, shovel ready, mid completion. And so I guess I would like to think we're shovel ready, but I guess I also don't want to put it out there as being overconfident. I guess we have verbal, I've had conversations with farmers who are like, yep, we have this need. We've lost our current, juicing. So, but a lot of it is, yeah, I'm going to talk to my other farmers that I've been collaborating with. I've had some verbal conversations there and reassurance that, yeah, there's support there. I guess just how much does that need to be? I mean, I do have funds available, so I can say, yep, I've got cash in hand. I mean, I shouldn't need any permits. So I guess, is it true for me to say, hey, I'm shovel ready, I guess, as opposed to just still in the planning stage?
I would suggest, if you have a business plan, you've worked through your costs, you've worked through your revenue stream, you understand your inputs and outputs and how you're going to manage that as a business. You've identified equipment, at least the nature of the equipment that you need. That, yeah, for a project like yours, you're more or less shovel ready. If it were a construction project, shovel ready would mean you've got engineering plans in place, the soil tests have been done, like you're ready to build. The earliest stage is more like I sat down with a friend and we were having coffee and we were saying, hey, how amazing would it be to have a mobile juicing unit? And we got really excited, so we applied for the grant. So you're definitely past that point.
Yeah, I guess the not having a quote unquote business plan per se, you know, completely specific. I mean, I have a vague idea of what it cost her to run the previous, you know,
Yeah.
business since I was looking at, so I guess, is that enough to say, or do I really need to?
It won't be determinative, so that's the first thing
Yeah.
to do, is you won't be
Yeah.
declined an
Yeah.
opportunity because of how you answer that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, depending on how you answer it,
for-
we may provide counsel one way or the other. I would suggest that it's the intention with all of this public money that's being invested is that it does have a long-term impact. So I think, and even for your own mental health, if you build a simple cash flow projection, because in this case, your business plan can be relatively simple. You know the producers, you know they have a need. Okay, so that's good. So what other projects are out there that are maybe attempting to similarly fill a need, which can happen when you have a recognized need, is a few different people recognize it and then they go after it, and then you've got competition you may not have been aware of. So knowing what your competition is, but perhaps more importantly, knowing the cost of operating, what's it going to cost you to run a pound of fruit?
Go back
And how many pounds can you process in a certain period of time? And how does that correlate with your demand? And then what are you charging? Does that cover your costs? And does it allow you to feel good about the business you're doing and continue to operate it? Do you have a period in the first year where you're operating at a loss, which would not be unusual for a startup? If so, how do you fund that loss? Do you have to raise your prices? Will that put, you know, just the kind of, they're common sense questions I'm sure you've already thought through in some detail. Putting the numbers down on paper can be really helpful for visualizing how all those pieces come together.
Okay.
Yeah. And the grant will certainly help with startup costs, reduce those. You know, you can have a simple plan that has your startup investments in it. Here's my equipment investments. On your cash flow, your equipment investments, like that's out of pocket money. For your profit and loss statement or your income statement, it's the depreciation that becomes an expense, because a year from now you can sell the equipment, but it'll be worth a little bit less. 5 years from now, it'll be worth even less than that. But I highly encourage you to take a look at that. And if you have questions about that, reach out to me. I can see if we can connect you with a template. And I think it's an incredibly exciting exercise to walk through, because it makes the whole thing just more real. And it feels like you're super smart when you look at it and you're like, yeah, it really is a good idea. It says so right on paper. But you'd hate to get a year into it and have done all this and be like, dang, we're losing money hand over fist and there's no way out of it.
Yeah. This is
Chris, I think you're on mute.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
One kind of side question here. This is my first time learning about the CIFL program. And just curious, do you have any projection on when when those funds will be available for new loan applicants?
Oh, the
The
agricultural future loan program. Yep.
Yeah.
We
That's the program that Greg was asking about, right?
correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So I would expect in the next 30 to 45 days, they will be able to start taking applications again.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
You bet. Well, we're at our time, so I will just remind everybody there's another one of these sessions Monday at 5 o'clock. Please feel free to rejoin us. And in the meantime, if you have questions that are unanswered, email them to myself or Jody. I will put our emails in the chat real quick. And we will either answer those via email. We will certainly make sure we have answers for Monday as well, if at all possible. And Jody Walder. And thank you very much for joining and giving us the opportunity to answer these questions for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk to you
Thank
soon.
you.
And thank you to Andrea for her interpretation.
On and get started. Perfect.